What are you going to do with a shovel in February in South Salem? This is a missing persons case.
Murdering Kathy. He got away with it.
I need to know what happened to Kathy.
As Christmas approached in the year 2000, something strange was happening in sunny Los Angeles. On Christmas Eve, while most people were getting ready to celebrate, one neighborhood in Beverly Hills felt oddly quiet. Instead of feeling happy and excited, people there felt worried and scared. Around lunchtime, police officers came to check on a woman named Susan because her neighbors were concerned about her dogs barking for a long time. When the officers got to Susan's house, they found the doors open, which seemed unusual. As they went inside, they felt like something was very wrong. They found Susan, who was 55 years old and loved to write stories, lying on the floor in her hallway. She wasn't moving. Her hair was messy, and there was blood on it. She was wearing comfortable clothes, like she was just having a normal day at home. But something terrible had happened. Someone had shot her in the back of her head. Susan's friends couldn't believe it. Even though she was a bit different from other people, everyone liked her. She was fun to be around and had interesting stories to tell, especially about her father, who used to be involved with criminals in Las Vegas. But now, Susan was gone, and everyone was left wondering why this awful thing had happened to her. The police started looking into what happened to Susan. They found out she had died at least a day before they found her. Her poor dogs had been barking for a long time, trying to tell someone that something was wrong. The way Susan died made the police think that someone had landed. They remembered that Susan had told her friend Kim she had something big to share. They wondered if this had anything to do with her death or if it was connected to her family's past with criminals. Years ago, Susan had gone back to Las Vegas to learn more about her family. She found out that her dad, Davey, had done some very bad things when he was younger. He had stolen from banks, taken people against their will, and even hurt people badly. Susan was shocked to learn her dad had been in a famous prison called Sing Sing. It must have been hard for her to think about the kind father she knew and the criminal he used to be. Susan had lost her parents when she was young, so she made her own family from all the friends she had. She knew so many people that she had a big book full of their names and phone numbers. But not everything in Susan's life was happy. She had a lot of problems with the person she rented her house from, named Dee. They argued almost every day, which was very different from how friendly Susan usually was with people. Susan was worried because she knew Dee had a gun, and she was scared for her dog's safety because of this. In the months before she died, Susan was having a lot of money problems. She couldn't pay her rent on time, and her house was a bit damaged. Her pets also made a mess, which didn't help. She told her friends she was scared of Dee and worried about her pets. Susan was also having trouble with her manager, Niall, and she talked about this a lot with her close friends. She was planning to move out in June, and it looked like things were getting better for her. But then something very sad happened. On December 22nd, Susan went out with her friend Rich and had a nice time. She didn't know it would be the last time she'd see her friends. The next day, while everyone else was getting ready for Christmas, someone hurt Susan very badly. At first, no one knew anything was wrong because it was such a busy time. On Christmas Day, people started to worry about Susan. She didn't show up at her manager Niall's party, and she wasn't answering her phone. Niall got so worried that he went to Susan's house to check on her. When he got there, the doors were locked and everything was very quiet. He had to climb in through a window to get inside. What he saw was shocking. The police had already been there and left black dust everywhere from looking for fingerprints. When Niall found out from a neighbor that Susan had been killed, he was very upset. Soon, all of Susan's friends and family heard the sad news. Everyone was very sad and confused about why this happened, especially during what should have been a happy holiday time. But there was more to this sad story. Something very strange happened next. The police in Beverly Hills got a letter in the mail. It was sent on the same day Susan died. The letter had Susan's address on it and the word cadaver, which means a dead body. Whoever wrote the letter spelled Beverly wrong, writing it as Beverly. This small mistake would turn out to be very important later on. While the police in Los Angeles were trying to figure things out, some big news came from New York. The people in charge of solving crimes there said that Susan was supposed to talk to them about another case. This case was about a woman named Kathy Durst, who had gone missing a long time ago. Kathy was married to Bobby Durst, the same Bobby who was Susan's good friend. Suddenly, everyone started wondering if Susan's death had something to do with this old case. To understand more, we need to go back in time to 1971. Bobby Durst was from a rich family that owned a lot of buildings in New York. He met a woman named Kathleen McCormick, who worked as a dental hygienist and had big dreams of her own. They fell in love very quickly. After only 2 dates, Bobby asked Kathleen to live with him. At first, things seemed great for Bobby and Kathleen, who everyone called Kathy. In early 1972, they opened a health food store together. It looked like Bobby wanted to do something different from his family's business, but this happy time didn't last long. Bobby's father wanted him to come back and work for the family business in New York City, so Bobby and Kathy moved to Manhattan. On April 12, 1973, which was Bobby's 30th birthday, they got married. But as time went on, Bobby and Kathy's marriage became very unhappy. By the 1980s, things were really bad. Kathy was trying to become a children's doctor, which was her big dream, but at home, she was very scared and unhappy. Bobby was mean to her, and she felt stuck. It was so sad to see how different Kathy's hopes for her future were from what was really happening in her life. On January 31st, 1982, something important happened. Kathy showed up at her friend Gilbert's house for dinner in Newtown, Connecticut. She looked very upset and was wearing red sweatpants, which wasn't like her usual neat clothes. Everyone could see she was very troubled. Sadly, this was the last time anyone would see Kathy alive. Later that night, Bobby called Kathy and told her to come back home to South Salem, New York. After this call, Kathy disappeared. No one knew what happened to her, and this mystery would bother everyone for many years. There had been signs that Kathy was in trouble. Earlier that month, she had to go to the hospital because her face was hurt. She said Bobby had hurt her. Kathy had been trying to leave Bobby, which might have put her in danger. As days went by and no one heard from Kathy, people got more and more worried. Her friend Gilbert kept trying to call her, and she even told the police. But Bobby didn't tell the police his wife was missing until February 5th, which was several days later. This made people wonder why he waited so long. The news people got very interested in the story. They asked a lot of questions and wanted to know everything. Bobby did some strange things. First, he said he would give $100,000 to anyone who could find Kathy, but then he changed it to only $15,000. People thought this was odd and wondered why he did that. This is where Susan Berman comes back into the story. Susan was Bobby's good friend from when they went to college together. She tried to help Bobby by keeping the news people away from him and answering their questions. Susan told everyone that Bobby couldn't have done anything to Kathy because he was with her at the time. She was very loyal to Bobby, but now people weren't sure if Susan was just being a good friend or if she knew more about what really happened to Kathy. Bobby did some very mean things with money to hurt Kathy. When she asked for $250,000 to leave him, he got angry. He stopped her from using their credit cards, took her name off their bank accounts, and wouldn't pay for her school anymore. He was trying to make her feel helpless and make her need him. There was even more to this sad story. While Bobby was married to Kathy, he was also dating another woman named Prudence Farrow. Prudence was famous because her sister was a movie star, and a famous Beatles song was written about her. For 3 years, Bobby had a separate apartment where he lived with Prudence. This showed that he wasn't being a good husband to Kathy at all. After Kathy disappeared, strange things happened. Some people who worked in the building where Bobby and Kathy lived in Manhattan said they saw Kathy on February 1st, which was a day after she went missing, but they weren't really sure. One person said he only saw her from behind for a moment. It was like Kathy had turned into a ghost that people thought they saw but weren't sure about. 3 weeks after Bobby told the police Kathy was missing, something very upsetting happened. The person who took care of the apartment building found Kathy's things in the trash. This made everyone feel very sad, like Kathy's whole life had been thrown away. Bobby told different stories about what happened the night Kathy disappeared. At first, he said they had a small fight, and then he took her to the train to go to the city. He even said he talked to her on the phone later that night, but as time went on, his story changed. Later, he said he just went to bed after they argued. This made the police wonder what else Bobby might not be telling the truth about. Bobby kept telling stories that didn't make sense. He said Kathy's school called him on February 4th to say she had been sick earlier that week, but but this seems strange because schools usually don't tell other people about students being sick. It wasn't until February 5th that Bobby finally told the police Kathy was missing. The police thought it was odd that he waited so long. As they looked into things more, they found that Bobby's stories didn't match up, which made them more suspicious. Kathy's friends and her sister were very worried. They decided to look for clues themselves. They went into Bobby and Kathy's house in South Salem, even though they weren't supposed to. What they saw was very sad. The house was a mess, like someone had gone through everything. Kathy's mail hadn't been opened, and her things were thrown in the trash. It looked like someone had tried to make it seem like Kathy had never lived there. Even though there were signs that something bad might have happened to Kathy, the police couldn't solve the case. But Kathy's family didn't want people to forget about her. In 1983, Kathy's sisters did something very serious. They signed a paper saying they thought Robert Durst was responsible for what happened to Kathy. They did this to try and get the police to keep looking for Kathy. While all this was happening, Bobby acted like everything was normal. He kept working at his family's company, but he was doing things in secret. In February 1990, he sold the house in South Salem where he and Kathy had lived. He also filed for divorce from Kathy, saying she had left him. He did these things quietly without telling anyone. This made people think he was trying to pretend Kathy had just gone away on her own. In 1994, something happened that made Bobby very angry. His father chose Bobby's brother Douglas to run the family business instead of Bobby. This made Bobby so upset that he sued his family to get his share of the money. In the end, he got $65 million, which was a huge amount. Then, in the summer of 1999, something big happened with Kathy's case. Even though she had been missing for almost 20 years, a police investigator named Joseph Becerra decided to look into it again. They searched the lake near the house where Bobby and Kathy used to live. They also looked all through the house again, using new ways to find clues that they couldn't find before. For months, no one knew they were looking into Kathy's case again, but on Halloween in 2000, Bobby found out. His younger sister called him and told him that people were asking questions about what happened to Kathy again. This happened just a few weeks before Susan Berman was killed. When people found out Susan had been killed, they started to wonder about Bobby even more. They found out he had been traveling around California and then flew back to New York the night before Susan was found dead. When the police asked Bobby questions, he told them about the money he had sent Susan and showed them some old papers, but after that, he wouldn't answer any more questions. Then things got really strange. Bobby was worried that people thought he might have done something wrong, so he tried to hide by dressing up as a woman who couldn't speak. He went all the way to Galveston, Texas to hide. This was a very odd thing to do, and it made people even more suspicious of him. Bobby managed to hide for almost a year, but on October 9th, 2001, everything fell apart. People found parts of a body in the water in Galveston. The body belonged to Morris Black, Bobby's elderly neighbor. The police arrested Bobby because of this. They let him go after he paid $250,000, but he was supposed to come back for court. Instead, he ran away again, and the police started looking for him everywhere. On November 30th, something very strange happened. Bobby was caught stealing from a store in Pennsylvania. He tried to take Band-Aids, a newspaper, and a sandwich without paying. This was weird because he had $500 in his pocket and $37,000 in a car he had rented. It didn't make sense for someone with so much money to steal such small things. When the police looked in the car Bobby had rented, they found some scary things. There were 2 guns, some drugs, and Morris Black's driver's license. They also found directions to the house of Gilbert, who was Kathy's old friend. It seemed like Bobby was still thinking about things from his past while he was running away. When 2003 started, Bobby was back in Texas. He had to go to court for killing Morris Black. He hired a very good lawyer from New York to help him. The people trying to prove Bobby was guilty said he planned to kill Morris Black, but Bobby's expensive lawyers had a different story. They said Bobby only hurt Morris because he was trying to protect himself. This made the trial much more complicated. Bobby's lawyers had a hard time talking to him because he was so different. They decided to do something unusual. They asked a doctor to check on Bobby, and the doctor said Bobby had something called Asperger's syndrome. This is a condition that makes it hard for people to understand social situations. The lawyers used this to explain why Bobby did strange things. They wanted people to see Bobby as someone who was misunderstood, not as someone who wanted to hurt others. When Bobby told his side of the story in court, it It was both scary and strange. He said Morris Black was a grumpy neighbor who had threatened him with a gun. Bobby said they had a fight and Morris got shot in the face. But what Bobby said next shocked everyone. Bobby calmly told the court that after Morris died, he cut up Morris's body using knives and saws. He said he drank a lot of whiskey and then threw the body parts in the water. When someone asked if he thought he could do something so awful while drunk, Bobby actually laughed and said yes. This made everyone in the court feel very uncomfortable. The people trying to prove Bobby was guilty had a big problem. They couldn't find Morris's head, which meant they couldn't prove Bobby was lying. On November 11th, 2003, something surprising happened. The court said Bobby was not guilty of killing Morris Black, but Bobby's problems with the law weren't over. On December 21st, 2004, he said he was guilty of running away when he was supposed to go to court, and of cutting up Morris's body. He made a deal with the court and only had to go to jail for 5 years. Bobby's luck seemed to keep working. On July 15th, 2005, he got out of jail after less than a year. He was supposed to stay at home and ask permission if he wanted to go anywhere, but Bobby didn't like following the rules and soon started causing trouble again. Unable to resist, he sneaked back to the place where it all happened, the boarding house where Black lost his life. Fate had a surprise waiting for him at a nearby mall. Who should he bump into but Judge Susan Criss, the very person who'd overseen his trial. Bound by her duty, the judge reported this slip-up, and Durst found himself back behind bars. But Durst's story wasn't over yet. Like a cat with 9 lives, he tasted freedom again on March 1st, 2006. He'd spent just 2 years locked up for his terrible deeds. Later, Judge Criss shared a chilling thought. The way Durst had taken Black apart showed a scary level of skill, as if he'd done it before. This raised some troubling questions. Had there been others? Were there more victims out there waiting to be found? As Durst walked free, these questions hung in the air. Here was a man who'd admitted to cutting up a body while drunk, yet somehow he'd slipped through the system's fingers once more. For the families of Kathleen Durst and Susan Berman, it must have felt like a cruel joke. Their loved ones were gone, while Durst, despite all signs pointing to his guilt, remained untouched by true justice. By 2006, their cases were still open wounds, but the story wasn't over. Fate had one more twist in store for Bobby Durst. In 2010, a movie called All Good Things hit theaters. It told a story much like Durst's, with famous actors playing the parts. Surprisingly, Durst himself loved the film. In a move no one saw coming, he reached out to the movie's director, Andrew directly, offering to tell his side of the story. What followed was a long 20-hour interview that would later become a TV show called The Jinx. Durst probably didn't realize it then, but his decision to step into the spotlight would change everything. During the making of The Jinx, something big happened. Susan Berman's stepson found an old envelope Durst had sent to Berman years ago. The writing on it looked just like the note sent to police after Berman died, even down to a misspelled word. It was as if Durst had left behind a clue pointing right at himself. An expert looked at both letters and said they were written by the same person. Now, armed with this powerful evidence, the filmmakers asked Durst for one more interview. At first, he didn't want to, but then he agreed. Maybe he thought he was too clever to get caught. When they showed Durst the matching handwriting, you could see the shock on his face. He admitted the letters looked alike, but said he didn't write either one. It was like watching a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, but the tables were about to turn in a way no one expected. What happened next was like something out of a movie. After the interview, Durst went to the bathroom, not realizing his microphone was still on. He started talking to himself, and what he said shocked everyone. There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course. It was like he had confessed without meaning to. After years of slipping away from justice, Durst had finally tripped over his own words. Things moved quickly after that. On March 14th, 2015, just before the last episode of The Jinx was about to air, police arrested Durst in New Orleans. They said he had killed Susan Berman. When they found Durst, he was hiding in a hotel under a fake name. In his room, they discovered all sorts of strange things: a gun, some drugs, maps showing how to get to Cuba and Florida, a mask, a fake ID, and lots of cash. It looked like he was getting ready to run away. As the case went on, more and more evidence came out. They found boxes full of Durst's stuff, including videos where he talked about what he'd done. In 2021, he finally went to trial for killing killing Susan Berman. The jury didn't believe Durst's side of the story. They said he was guilty and gave him life in prison without any chance of getting out. They thought he had killed Susan because she knew too much about what happened to his wife, Kathy, who had gone missing years ago. Durst died in prison, but the story didn't end there. Kathy's family tried to get money from his fortune, while his wife also wanted a share. People say Durst was a very strange person. There were weird stories about him, like how he once peed on candy in a store. Some even wondered if he might have been involved in other crimes that were never solved. We'll probably never know all of Durst's secrets, but his story shows us how a mix of money and madness can lead to terrible things. It's a reminder that sometimes the truth has a way of coming out, even when it seems impossible. That's all for today's Twisted Tales, sleuths. If you're hungry for more true crime mysteries, cold cases, and bizarre stories, make sure you're part of our Secret Sleuth squad. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You don't want to miss our next deep dive into the dark and unexplained. Until next time, this is Secret Sleuths signing off. Stay curious, stay safe, and keep sleuthing.